I was 62 when my husband and son invited me to a family gathering that turned out to be a setup. Not a birthday party, not a barbecue, not a lazy afternoon playing with my grandson on the porch. No, they brought me there to talk about my future. And by future, they meant putting me in a nursing home. My name is Heidi Klum. I've never been frail, never been helpless. I was the one who raised our son Avery while Silas built his career. I cooked, cleaned, budgeted, and worked part-time jobs to make ends meet. I kept our lives from unraveling during recessions, during layoffs, during the years Silas was more focused on climbing ladders than being present. I gave up a lot, dreams of owning a bookstore, of traveling, but I did it because I loved them. And I trusted them. That was my first mistake. It started with a phone call. "Hey, Mom," Avery said. "We're putting together a little get-together this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just family time. You, Dad, me, Lila, and Finn." I smiled at the thought. "That sounds lovely. It's been a while since we all sat down together." "Exactly," he said. "We've all been so busy. We miss you." That part felt real. I missed them too. Lila was always kind to me, and Finn, my sweet 6-year-old grandson, was the light of my life. He used to call me Super Grandma. I still had the crayon drawing he made of me in a cape, flying over a field of flowers. So I dressed nicely that Saturday. A soft blue sweater, comfortable jeans, and the necklace Finn gave me for my birthday last year, a tiny silver heart on a thin chain. I even brought dessert, lemon bars, his favorite. When I arrived at Avery's house, things felt off. No music, no smell of food, just silence and tension. Lila opened the door with a tight smile. "Hi, Heidi, come in." I stepped inside. Avery was already seated at the dining table. Silas was beside him. Neither of them looked particularly cheerful. And Finn, my heart, wasn't even there. "Where's Finn?" I asked, my voice catching a little. "With a friend," Lila said quickly. "Playdate." "Oh," I said, confused. "I thought this was a family." "We wanted to talk," Avery interrupted, his tone unusually formal, "about some things we've been discussing." I looked at Silas. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a gathering. This was an ambush. Avery pulled out a manila folder and laid it on the table. Lila sat beside him, nodding like this was a boardroom meeting. "Mom," Avery began, "we've been noticing that you've seemed a little off lately, forgetting things, repeating yourself." I blinked. "What?" "We're worried," Lila added. "You left the oven on last week, didn't you?" "I was preheating it," I snapped, surprised by my own volume. "I hadn't put the chicken in yet." Silas finally spoke. "Heidi, we're just trying to help." "That's not what this is," I said, voice trembling. "What are you trying to say?" Avery opened the folder. Inside were brochures, nursing homes, assisted living centers. One even had the word memory care bolded in bright letters. I felt like the room spun. "You can't be serious." "It's not about getting rid of you," Avery said, almost too calmly. "It's about making sure you're taken care of." "I take care of myself," I said, standing up. "I've been doing that for 62 years. "Heidi," Silas said, "you've been under a lot of stress since retirement. It's normal for people to need help at your age." I looked at the three of them, my husband, my son, and my daughter-in-law, and realized this wasn't concern. This was a decision already made. They weren't asking. They were telling. I didn't stay long after that. They tried to calm me, to soften the blow with talk of amenities and peace of mind. I didn't want amenities. I wanted respect. I walked out without touching the lemon bars. On the way home, I had to pull over twice just to breathe. How long had they been planning this? Had I really been so blind? I thought about the nights I made soup when Avery was sick, the time I sat in that cold gym for 3 hours while he tried out for varsity basketball, the birthdays I spent planning perfect parties, the years I stood by Silas through his late hours, his layoffs, his selfishness, and now they were ready to file me away like a piece of old furniture, because I was inconvenient, because I didn't fit the image they had of their tidy, curated life. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. That night I couldn't sleep. The words kept echoing. Memory care, assisted living, peace of mind. I paced the kitchen, then sat down at the table, staring at the worn wood where I'd signed Christmas cards and grocery lists and tax returns. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them write the rest of my story. I was going to pick up the pen myself. The next morning, I called Marlene. She'd been my best friend since college, one of those rare people who never asked for anything but always gave everything. "Marlene," I said, "you're not going to believe what happened." I told her everything, every word, every look, every insult dressed as concern. She was silent for a moment. "Then come over, now." So I did. Marlene made coffee, wrapped me in a hug that smelled like cinnamon, and handed me a notepad. Write down everything you remember, she said. Every detail. We're going to make sense of this. For the first time since that awful gathering, I felt steady. Like maybe I wasn't crazy. Like maybe I had more power than they wanted me to think. Over the next week, I went back over bank statements. Silas and I had always shared a retirement account. We'd agreed to keep it simple, but something caught my eye. A withdrawal. $30,000. Labeled Property Contribution AK. I stared at it for a long time. AK. Avery Klum. My son. My son had used our retirement money to help buy a house for himself. Without telling me. I checked the dates. The transaction happened 3 months ago. 3 months before they sat me down and told me I was losing it. My hands shook. This wasn't concern. This was a setup. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to remove me so they could keep what wasn't theirs. I met with a lawyer the next day. I brought everything. Copies of statements, timelines, my notes. She listened, then nodded slowly. This isn't uncommon, she said. When one partner tries to declare the other mentally incompetent, it can shift financial control. They were trying to have me declared incompetent? If they get a doctor to sign off, they could legally transfer assets without your consent, especially if the other partner agrees. My breath caught. Silas, my husband of 40 years, he would do that? The lawyer leaned in. You need to protect yourself, now. And I did. I set up a separate bank account, transferred my portion of retirement savings, froze the joint line of credit, and I made a will, a new one. After visiting the lawyer and seeing it all spelled out in black and white, I no longer doubted what was happening. I was being quietly erased. What scared me most wasn't the betrayal. It was how calm they were doing it, as if they believed I'd go down without a whisper. Like I was a piece of the puzzle they could just remove without messing up the picture. But what they didn't realize was, I was the table they built their puzzle on. I'd held this family together. And now, they'd see what happened when that foundation shook back. I stayed quiet, calm, collected. I didn't confront Silas, not yet. I needed more. So I started watching, listening, and waiting. Silas and I still shared a home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Everything he said felt calculated, every glance measured. He'd start sentences with, "You forgot again," or, "That's not what you said yesterday," planting little seeds of doubt. I stopped responding emotionally. That's what he wanted. If I exploded, it would feed the narrative that I was unstable. Instead, I wrote things down. Every strange moment, every accidental gaslight, like the time he couldn't find the medicine I always kept in the same drawer, or the time he pretended not to hear me, then claimed I'd never spoken at all. It was subtle but real, and dangerous. Then something else happened. I was organizing old papers in the basement when I found a folder labeled Whitestone Property. That's the name of the house Avery and Lila just bought. Silas had told me he was just advising them on the paperwork, but the folder said otherwise. It contained receipts, agreements, and worst of all, an email thread between Silas and the mortgage agent. Subject line, co-signing docs per Heidi's approval. Except I never gave approval. I never signed a thing, but someone had signed, my name, my handwriting, forged. My hands went cold. This wasn't just betrayal. This was fraud. I took everything to Marlene. She looked through the documents, shaking her head. You've got him, Heidi. This isn't just selfish, it's illegal. We took the files straight to my lawyer. She scanned them and nodded grimly. This is forgery, and it implicates both your husband and your son. What can I do? She looked at me. You can press charges, but you can also use this to negotiate your way out, quietly, cleanly, and on your terms. And just like that, I had leverage. They tried to lock me away. Now I held the key. I didn't act immediately. I waited. Waited until Silas came to me one morning, mug of coffee in hand, fake warmth on his face. Heidi, he said, we should talk. I raised an eyebrow. About what? He sat across from me. I've been thinking. It's probably time to get serious about the future, about safety, about your care. There it was. The setup. Your memory's not what it used to be, he continued, voice low. You've been forgetting appointments, misplacing things. Avery and I agree. It's time to explore long-term solutions. I stared at him, then smiled. Funny, I said, because my lawyer and I were just talking about long-term solutions, too. His face twitched. Oh? Yes, I said. She's especially interested in the forgery of my signature on Avery's mortgage application. His mug froze halfway to his lips. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned in. I think you do. He went pale. I stood, walked to my purse, and pulled out a copy of the document, laid it on the table. He stared at it like it might catch fire. I haven't filed anything yet, I said calmly. But if you mention nursing home to me one more time, I will, And I won't stop there. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed hard. I kept going. Here's what's going to happen. I'm moving out. The house is in both our names, but I'll let you stay for now. I'll be taking my share of our savings, and I'll be separating every financial tie between us. Heidi, be reasonable. No, I said sharply. You don't get to use that word anymore. You lost that right when you betrayed me. He sat back, stunned. I grabbed my keys, my purse, and walked out. And I didn't look back. With Marlene's help, I moved into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment downtown. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I bought soft curtains, stocked the pantry with my favorite teas, and brought in the antique rocking chair that used to sit on our old porch. The one Silas always said was too country. I loved that chair. I even set up a little reading corner, finally bought the bookshelf I always wanted, filled it with secondhand novels, poetry collections, and cookbooks I never had time to explore. It was quiet, but not lonely. I was beginning again, on my terms. Avery didn't reach out, not even when I sent him the legal notice that I was removing my name from any financial connection to his home. He tried to fight it, but my lawyer made it clear. If he pushed, we'd press charges for forgery. He backed off fast. And still, no apology. Not even a phone call. It hurt. Of course it did. But hurt is just proof you cared. And I was done caring for people who saw me as disposable. Instead, I poured my love into something new. Something mine. I remembered the little dream I'd shelved long ago. A bookstore. Cozy. Small. A place where people could read, sip coffee, and feel safe. I called it Chapter 2, because that's what this was. Marlene helped me decorate. Her granddaughter painted a mural on the back wall, a field of open books blooming like flowers. The first day we opened, only 5 people came in. But by the end of the month, we had regulars. Women my age, college kids, retired teachers, young moms looking for bedtime stories. One afternoon, a woman came in with her teenage daughter. She held a copy of Little Women. "This was my mom's favorite," she said softly. "She passed last year." I smiled gently. "It's one of mine, too." We sat and talked for over an hour. That's what Chapter 2 became. Not just a store, but a space for stories, for healing, for women like me who weren't ready to be erased. I was sitting behind the register one rainy Tuesday when the door jingled open. Finn, my grandson. He stood there, dripping slightly, a backpack slung over one shoulder. "Grandma?" he said, eyes wide. My heart nearly stopped. "Avery's car broke down," he said. "I remembered you used to talk about your bookstore. I looked it up." I stepped around the counter and wrapped him in the biggest hug I had left. "You found me," I whispered. "I missed you," he said. I nodded. "I missed you more." He stayed for hours, read books, told me about school, about how things at home felt weird lately. "How's your dad?" I asked gently. Finn shrugged. "Angry all the time. Mom, too. They say it's money stuff." I didn't say a word, just stroked his hair. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the city lights flicker. I wasn't bitter. Not anymore. I was free. I had lost a husband, a son, and the life I thought I was supposed to have. But I had gained something rarer. Peace, purpose, and a new chapter worth reading. After Finn left the bookstore that afternoon, I sat alone for a while, my thoughts spinning in quiet circles. He had grown so much. But what got me most wasn't how tall he'd gotten or how mature his voice sounded. It was how sad his eyes looked. Eyes don't lie, especially not a child's. Whatever was happening at home wasn't just financial stress, it was deeper. Finn didn't have the words to say it, but I'd been a mother, a wife, a woman who'd lived through 40 years of "I'm fine" meaning anything but, and I knew dysfunction when I saw it. A week later, I was closing up the shop when I saw a familiar figure pacing outside. It was Lila, hair tied back, coat clutched to her chest, eyes darting like she wanted to run, but didn't. I opened the door and stepped into the cool evening air. "Lila?" I said gently. She turned fast, startled. "Hi, sorry, I shouldn't be here. Finn told me he saw you and—" "It's okay," I said. "You want to come in?" She hesitated, then nodded. Inside, I made tea while she stared at the mural on the back wall, the blooming books with soft petals and swirling pages. "This place is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." We sat in the corner booth. I didn't push, just waited. Finally, she spoke. I didn't know what they were doing. With the retirement money, with the house. Avery kept me in the dark until it was already done. I nodded. "I didn't help," she added quickly. "I didn't fight for you either, and I should have." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I feel like I married a stranger." That hit something inside me. I knew that feeling well. "He used to be kind," she said. "Before the house, the stress, the obsession with stability. Now he's just cold." "Does he hurt you?" I asked softly. No, she said, not with his hands, just everything else. I reached for her hand. You don't have to keep living like that. She looked at me with wide, tired eyes. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. And right there in my little bookstore, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about me anymore. Over the next few weeks, Lila started visiting more often. She'd help organize shelves, read to the neighborhood kids during story hour, bake muffins and drop them off without saying a word. It became a rhythm, and one day I handed her an envelope. What's this? She asked. Your paycheck, I said. Her eyes filled. I wasn't working here. You were, I said, in more ways than one. She hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, and I didn't mind. Meanwhile, Silas tried calling. I let it go to voicemail. Every time. I wasn't interested in his apologies, if that's what they even were. I had no curiosity left for his version of the truth. I had seen enough. My lawyer updated me regularly. He had quietly sold his consulting shares. There were whispers of a medical issue, but nothing confirmed. I didn't care. I had no more energy to pour into a man who'd once plotted to have me institutionalized. And yet part of me knew something was coming. And it was. 3 months after the bookstore's first anniversary, I got a call from Marlene. She had that tone in her voice, the one people use when they're trying to soften a blow. Heidi, she said, Silas is in the hospital. What happened? Pancreatic cancer, late stage, maybe a few months left. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just felt hollow. His attorney called me, Marlene added. He's asking to see you. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in my little reading corner, heart thudding, brain spinning. Was I supposed to go? Was there anything left to say? Would closure bring peace? Or just open wounds I had finally stitched shut? I went. Not for him. For me. He was gaunt, pale, barely a shadow of the man I once married. When I stepped into the room, his eyes widened. For a moment I saw a flicker of recognition. Regret. Something human. Heidi, he croaked. I'm here, I said, standing by the door. He tried to sit up, winced, gave up. I was wrong, he said. I thought I was protecting you, planning ahead. By forging my name? I asked coldly. He winced again, not from pain this time, from truth. I panicked, he whispered. I lost money, bad investments. I thought if I made it look like you were declining, I could shield you, keep you from worrying. That's not what you did, I said. I know. Silence. Then he whispered something that surprised me. You rebuilt without me. I nodded. You looked strong, he said. I am. Tears welled in his eyes. I miss the woman who used to bring me tea when I stayed up working late. I miss the man who used to say thank you, I replied. He smiled, a soft, tired smile. I never deserved you. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. When I left the hospital, I didn't feel lighter, but I felt done. Like the last page of a book had finally turned. And I was ready to start a new one. That night, I sat down and wrote my will. Not because I was old, but because I had something worth passing on. Chapter 2 would go to Lila and Finn. Not just as a store, but as a seed. I set up a trust, made arrangements, made sure every book, every shelf, every letter of the name on the sign would continue. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was theirs too. The seasons turned as they always do. And with each one, I felt lighter, stronger, more myself. Word got around that Silas passed in early spring. Quietly. No funeral, no service. Avery and Lila didn't invite me to whatever small gathering they had, and I didn't expect them to. I had already said my goodbye. The closure had come before the end. And honestly, I didn't feel grief. I felt peace. I felt gratitude for the lessons. And most of all, I felt clarity. Avery showed up at Chapter 2 3 weeks later. He didn't call. Didn't ask if I wanted to see him. He just walked in. I was shelving new arrivals. Second-hand memoirs, poetry books, and a copy of Man's Search for Meaning that made me pause every time I touched it. He stood by the counter for a long time before speaking. Hi, Mom. I turned, looked at him, really looked. He was tired, worn, a shadow of the confident man who once called me outdated behind my back. Hello, Avery. I heard about Dad, he said. I guess you know too. I nodded. I also know what he did, I said simply. So don't come in here pretending we're starting from scratch. He looked down. You're angry. No, I said, I'm awake. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something I didn't expect. I think I lost myself somewhere. After Finn was born, after the job started pressuring me, I thought, if I could just get ahead, just control everything, I'd be safe. I stayed quiet. I know I hurt you. I know I let him do it. And I didn't stop him. I was scared. Scared of what? I asked. He looked up, his voice cracked. Scared of becoming you. I blinked. What does that mean? He rubbed his face, frustrated. You gave up everything for us, for Dad, for me, and look how you ended up, alone. I stood still, letting his words settle. Then I said, I'm not alone, Avery, I'm free. He looked confused. I stepped around the counter. Do you know what I do now? I wake up every morning and make coffee the way I like it. I open a store filled with stories that matter. I spend my days around people who care. And I go to sleep at night without fear that someone's plotting to take away my future. I pointed to the sign on the wall. This store isn't just a dream. It's proof. Proof that I didn't give up everything. I chose to love. I chose to give. And when the time came, I chose myself. He stood silent. Can you say the same? I asked. His eyes welled, but he didn't answer. I don't need your apology, I said gently. I needed it 2 years ago. Now I'm good. He swallowed hard. Can I bring Finn by sometime? I nodded. He's always welcome. You know where to find us. And with that, I turned back to my books. Avery left quietly. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was just another chapter turning. But either way, I didn't feel shaken. I felt whole. Finn came by the following weekend. He curled up in the reading nook, a stack of space adventure books beside him, and a cup of cocoa with extra marshmallows in his hands. I sat across from him, sipping my tea. Grandma, he asked, how come this place feels better than home? I smiled softly. Because here, I said, everyone is safe to be who they are. He nodded like that made perfect sense. That summer, Lila moved into the apartment above the bookstore with Finn. They had found the courage to separate from Avery, at least for a while. She said she needed space, and I supported her completely. I gave her a key to the shop, and a key to her own life. Together, we built something even better. She managed the cafe corner, curated book clubs, and handled the young adult shelf like a seasoned librarian. Finn started organizing story time himself, reading aloud like a little professor to toddlers on colorful mats. One afternoon, I stood behind the counter watching them both, and I realized this was the family I'd built. Not perfect, not traditional, but real, grounded, and earned. Later that year, I took a short vacation, my first in decades. I visited a coastal town I had always dreamed of, sat on a sun-warmed bench with a stack of mystery novels and a sketch pad, talked to strangers, laughed out loud in public. A woman about my age sat beside me one afternoon. She asked what I did. I own a bookstore, I said proudly. Her eyes lit up. That sounds like a dream. It is, I replied, but I didn't always have it. And then I told her the little bit of my story. Not all the pain, just the part where I rebuilt. And when I finished, she whispered, "You give me hope." That's when I realized the real legacy I was leaving behind. Not money, not assets, not even the store, but the example. That it's never too late to reclaim your name. That silence doesn't mean weakness. That aging doesn't mean fading. That reinvention is always an option. When I turned 65, we threw a party. A small one, just close friends, a few neighbors, and some regulars from the shop. Finn made a banner that read, "Super Grandma, Chapter 3 begins." Lila baked a cake from scratch, and Marlene gave a toast. She said, Heidi didn't just survive betrayal, she redefined what it means to thrive. And that, I think, is the greatest compliment I've ever received. Now, every time someone asks how I spend my days, I smile and say, I own a bookstore, I drink good tea, and I get to watch women rewrite their lives, just like I did. Because I'm not someone who was sent to a nursing home at 62. I'm not someone who was erased. I'm Heidi Klum, and I wrote my own ending, one chapter at a time.